you get when you give CIA agents free rein to kidnap, drug, torture, and experiment on whoever they want? Project MKUltra, an operation so unbelievable that it sounds like a conspiracy theorist's bedtime story. Welcome back to Thinkology. My name is Robin, and I'll be the one telling you today's bedtime story. Without much further ado, let's get right to it. Project MKUltra was a CIA operation that was conducted from 1953 to 1973. Over the course of the operation, the CIA performed experiments that ranged from using LSD for brainwashing to creating a brain implant for dogs that would make them controllable via remote. Not only were the experiments unethical, many of them were highly illegal as well. So how and why did this happen? Let's take a look at how one of the craziest and most controversial government programs in history came to be. First of all, let's talk about why the CIA thought MKUltra was necessary in the first place. The project began in the 1950s during the Cold War, when the US was concerned that other countries were developing mind control tactics. That's right, mind control. Look, the 50s was a different time. We were scared of just about everything, right? Richard Helms, the former director of the CIA, told a journalist, "There was deep concern over the issue of brainwashing. We felt that it was our responsibility not to lag behind the Russians or the Chinese in this field, and the only way to find out what the risks were was to test things, such as LSD and other drugs, that could be used to control human behavior. These experiments went on for many years." Fear of communist brainwashing quickly spread through the American public as well. A New York Times article from 1954 reads, "The totalitarians have misused the knowledge of how the mind works for their own purposes. They've applied the Pavlovian technique in a far more complex and subtle way, of course, to produce the reflex of mental and political submission of the humans in their power." Jeez, that's reaching a little bit, isn't it? These factors are what led CIA Director Allen Dulles to create MKUltra in 1953. Dulles then appointed Sidney Gottlieb, a chemist and spy master, which is a really cool title, to oversee the program. Gottlieb had joined the CIA in 1951 as a poison expert, and his penchant for developing deadly toxins earned him the nickname the Black Sorcerer. Just a group of nerds, huh? Gottlieb was given free rein to conduct any experiments that he wanted. Author Stephen Kinzer wrote, "Gottlieb operated almost completely without supervision. He had sort of a checkoff from his titular boss and from his real boss, Richard Helms, and from the CIA director, Allen Dulles. But none of them really wanted to know what he was doing. This guy had a license to kill. He was allowed to requisition human subjects across the United States and around the world and subject them to any kind of abuse that he wanted, even up to the level of being fatal. Yet, nobody looked over his shoulder. He never had to file serious reports to anybody. I think the mentality must have been that this project is so important, mind control, if it can be mastered, is the key to global world power. Ah, I see their hearts were in the right place." MKUltra wasn't the first CIA operation that involved mind control, though. It was preceded by Project Artichoke, a mind control operation that studied hypnosis, forced drug addiction and withdrawal, and other drugs on test subjects. The main goal of the project was to determine if an individual could be made to perform an act of attempted assassination involuntarily. Extracting valuable information was also important for the project. 3 interrogation teams were formed and sent overseas to conduct interrogation experiments. The CIA agents were told to target potential agents, defectors, refugees, POWs, and others. What the CIA learned during Project Artichoke was transferred into MKUltra in 1953. Soon after MKUltra was established, the CIA began experimenting with LSD and other drugs to be used for brainwashing and torture. According to an NPR interview with journalist Stephen Kinzer, Gottlieb arranged for the CIA to pay $240,000 to buy the world's entire supply of LSD. I didn't know that you could do that. He brought this to the United States and he began spreading it around to hospitals, clinics, prisons, and other institutions, asking them, through bogus foundations, to carry out research projects and find out what LSD was, how people reacted to it, and how it might be able to be used for a tool for mind control. The CIA began targeting vulnerable people to dose with LSD. Mental patients, prisoners, and drug addicts were all used as test subjects. One CIA officer said they went after people who could not fight back. In one terrifying example, a mental patient from Kentucky was given LSD every day for 174 days in a row. Terrifying doesn't even begin to cover that. Although many of the people who were given LSD did not consent to the experiments, MKUltra did have volunteers as well. The CIA funded volunteer research projects through several hospitals, universities, and prisons. Some of the most famous volunteers for these programs include Ken Kesey, author of One Who Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, poet Allen Ginsberg, and Grateful Dead lyricist Robert Hunter. Why does the Grateful Dead one not surprise me all that much? Free LSD? Uh-huh. One of the most famous prisoners who volunteered for the program was gangster Whitey Bulger. According to Bulger, he was told that he was volunteering for an experiment that involved curing schizophrenia, but in reality, he was being used as a test subject to study the long-term effects of LSD. Bulger was dosed with LSD daily for over a year and thought he was losing his mind. After realizing the true intent behind the experiment, Bulger wrote, "I was in prison for committing a crime, but they committed a greater crime against me." Bulger isn't the only famous criminal associated with MKUltra. Although it hasn't been proven 100%, some sources claim that Ted Kaczynski, better known as the Unabomber, was a subject of MKUltra experiments while he was attending Harvard University. The story goes that Kaczynski volunteered for a study that was conducted by Dr. Henry Murray, who was actually a CIA employee. During the study, Kaczynski and other volunteers were harshly interrogated and humiliated, causing them to experience extreme stress. Kaczynski was reportedly badly affected by the experiment, and it led to him becoming a social outcast. Eventually, he would go on a bombing spree that lasted 18 years, killing 3 people and injuring 23 others. We don't know for certain if Kaczynski was an MKUltra test subject. Any CIA records that could have linked him to the project were most likely destroyed in the mass document destruction ordered by Richard Helms and Sidney Gottlieb in 1973. One of the strangest and most unbelievable LSD experiments conducted during MKUltra was Operation Midnight Climax. Like other MKUltra experiments, Midnight Climax involved dosing unsuspecting civilians with LSD and other drugs. However, even among other MKUltra projects, Midnight Climax stands out as particularly unconventional. During the operation, the CIA hired sex workers and set up their own brothels in order to spy on and illegally dose Johns. Sidney Gottlieb hired George White, a rock'em sock'em cop not overly carried away with playing spook, to run Midnight Climax. In 1955, White rented an apartment in San Francisco and turned it into a CIA-funded brothel. The brothel was outfitted with surveillance equipment and a two-way mirror so that White and other agents could see what was happening in the room. White would sit behind the mirror and sip martinis from a pitcher while watching what happened to the clients. Yeah, a lot of scientific stuff going on. Dude's getting drunk, you're ruining your whole experiment. To prevent creating a paper trail of the illicit activities, the sex workers that White hired weren't conventionally paid. Instead, they were given vouchers for free favors like getting out of jail. In one report, Gottlieb wrote, "Due to the highly unorthodox nature of these activities and the considerable risk incurred by these individuals, it is impossible to require that they provide a receipt for those payments, or that they indicate the precise manner in which funds were spent." I cannot believe the get out of jail free card is a real thing. In the beginning of the project, the sex workers were told to focus on working-class men. White thought that people from poorer backgrounds would be easier to keep quiet about what happened inside of the brothels. However, White and his agents soon began dosing people outside of the brothels as well, and their list of targets rapidly expanded. Under White's orders, agents began dosing random people in public with various drugs. Normal people at restaurants and bars were drugged without their knowledge or consent. One source within the CIA reports that if we were scared enough of a drug to not try it on ourselves, we sent it to San Francisco. Some of the materials delivered to agents in San Francisco were detailed by author John Marks in an interview. There, TSS, or Technical Services Staff scientists, tested such MKUltra specialties as stink bombs, itching and sneezing powders, and diarrhea inducers. TSS's Ray Treichler, the Stanford chemist, sent these harassment substances out of California for testing by White, along with such delivery systems as a mechanical launcher that could throw foul-smelling objects 100 yards, glass ampules that could be stepped on in a crowd to release any of Treichler's powders, a fine hypodermic needle to inject drugs through the cork in a wine bottle, and drug-coated swizzle sticks. With a term like swizzle sticks, you know it was a long time ago. White apparently loved the depraved work he was doing. In a letter addressed to Gottlieb, he openly relished the opportunity to abuse his power. How surprising is that, everyone? Of course, I was a very minor missionary, actually a heretic, but I toiled wholeheartedly in the vineyards because it was fun, fun, fun. Where else could a red-blooded American boy lie, kill, and cheat, steal, deceive, rape, and pillage with the sanction and blessing of the All-Highest? Pretty good stuff, brother. It is pretty wild to think that people like this were given government funding and sanction. Civilians weren't the only targets of these experiments, though. Deputy U.S. Marshal Wayne Ritchie was dosed with LSD at a holiday party and quickly became manic and paranoid. After fleeing the party, Ritchie went on a drinking binge across the city, worsening his paranoia. In an interview with San Francisco Weekly, Ritchie said, "I was paranoid. I got down to where I thought everyone was against me. The whole world was against me. I decided if they wanted to get rid of me, I'll help them. I'll just go get one of my guns from my office and hold up a bar. I thought, I can get enough money to get my girlfriend an airline ticket back to New York, and I'll turn myself in." But I was unsuccessful. In the morning after the party, Ritchie was still under the influence of LSD. After retrieving 2 revolvers from his office, he drove to the Shady Grove bar and ordered a drink. Once his drink was finished, Ritchie pulled out a gun and tried to rob the bartender. A waitress asked Ritchie what he was doing, and while he was distracted, a customer knocked him unconscious. When he woke up, Ritchie was in handcuffs. Ritchie pleaded guilty to attempted armed robbery but avoided spending time in jail. Instead, he was given a fine and 5 years of probation. Years later, Ritchie opened a lawsuit against the United States. However, the judge presiding over the case decided that, while the CIA agents did things that were reprehensible, he concluded that it was not clear by a preponderance of the evidence that Mr. Ritchie was administered LSD. It may be what happened, but we don't operate on hunches. Operation Midnight Climax only stopped after CIA Inspector General John Ehrman found out about the brothels and recommended that the program be ended. Like with the rest of Project MKUltra, most of the files regarding Midnight Climax were destroyed. To this day, we still don't know how many people were affected by this illegal and abusive operation. One thing that is evident throughout MKUltra is the fact that Gottlieb and the rest of the CIA were willing to do whatever it took to gain the upper hand in the mind control arms race, including working with Nazi torturers. Doctors who had operated in Nazi concentration camps were brought to America and hired to advise CIA agents on the use of mescaline and deadly sarin gas. While the CIA's experiments with drugs on US citizens are certainly appalling, they pale in comparison to the torture inflicted by CIA agents overseas. In order to hide some of the more brutal experiments, the CIA created detention centers around the world. In an interview with NPR, author Stephen Kinzer said, CIA officers in Europe and Asia were capturing enemy agents and others who they felt might be suspected persons or were otherwise what they called expendable. They would grab these people and throw them into cells and test all kinds of, not just drug potions, but other techniques, like electroshock, extremes of temperature, sensory isolation, all the meantime bombarding them with questions, trying to see if they could break down resistance and find a way to destroy the human ego. So these were projects designed not only to understand the human mind, but to figure out how you can destroy it. And that made Gottlieb, although in some ways a very compassionate person, certainly the most prolific torturer of his generation. The CIA expanded the scope of MKUltra even further by recruiting psychiatrist Donald Ewan Cameron to conduct experiments in Canada. Cameron was best known for developing the concept of psychic driving. Psychic driving was a technique where patients were played a repeating message in order to alter their minds. Cameron believed that he could cure schizophrenia and other mental illnesses by breaking down someone's mind and reprogramming their psyche. During his time as a part of MKUltra, Cameron expanded his procedures and developed a technique known as de-patterning. This process involved giving patients large doses of LSD, placing them into drug-induced comas, and then subjecting them to incredibly powerful electroshock therapy, up to 75 times the normal intensity. The patients that Cameron experimented on were normal people who did not consent to the cruel treatments they were given. Many of these patients experienced severe long-term effects, including Jean Steele. Steele was a young mother who was experiencing depression. After failing to overcome her condition, she was admitted to the Allen Memorial Institute, where Cameron ran his experiments. By the time she was released 6 months later, Jean was no longer herself. Her mind was irreversibly damaged by Cameron's cruel and dangerous experiments. Like other patients of Cameron, Jean was subjected to electroshock treatments and psychic driving. She was kept in a drug-induced coma on 2 separate occasions. One of them lasted 18 days, and 29 the other. According to a file that Jean's daughter obtained from the Canadian Department of Justice, Jean threatened to kill herself and screamed that she felt like she was being nailed to the cross. Jean's daughter Allison detailed the terrible effects that her mother suffered after the treatment. Before being admitted to the institute, Jean was a bright and active woman who enjoyed dancing and playing bridge with friends. Afterwards, she was a shell of her former self. According to an interview with Allison, Jeannie would spend hours sitting in the dark or in her room. When she drove, she kept the flicker on to keep her company. She once arranged all the patio furniture outside, placing sticks wrapped in tinfoil on the chairs, declaring it was Sherbrooke Street. She spray-painted a white living room ceiling in red swirls and spray-painted the toilet seat silver. They stole my mother from me. They used her as a human guinea pig, and they stripped her of her emotions, Jean's daughter said. What they did to my mother was torture. Another disturbing account from this era is that of Louis Weinstein. Louis was a successful businessman who suffered from anxiety. After being admitted to the Allen Memorial Institute, he was dosed with LSD, shocked repeatedly, and subjected to psychic driving. Due to the extreme methods used by Cameron, Louis was irreparably damaged. In an interview with the Washington Post, Louis's son said that the experiment left his dad a human guinea pig, a poor, pathetic man with no memory and no life. He lost his business, he lost everything. When you're 13 years old and you see your father, an independent, kind, smart person, becoming a different man before your eyes, it's impossible to accommodate that. I remember one of his first visits home from the hospital. He didn't talk much, and when he did talk, it made no sense. When he wasn't sleeping, he was drowsy. He asked us things about his parents, even though they'd been dead for years. His memory was gone. At night once, when I was in bed, I saw him come into my room and urinate on the floor. He didn't know where he was. Even when his patients attempted to avoid the abusive treatments, Cameron would coerce them to continue with the program. Velma Orlikow reportedly hated the LSD treatment she was receiving and told Cameron she wasn't going to take it anymore. Cameron then told her, "Lassie, don't you want to get well so you can go home and see your husband?" Afterward, Orlikow continued her treatment and was quoted as saying, "I thought he was God. I don't know how I could have been so stupid. A lot of us were naive. We thought psychiatrists had the answers. Here was the greatest in the world with all of these titles." Thanks to the treatment that she was guilt-tripped into continuing, Velma experienced severe long-term consequences. Velma told the Washington Post, "I suffer from chronic depression which sometimes becomes acute. I call those periods my black holes. I don't see anybody and I won't leave the house. I can't read and I used to love to read. I can't write a letter. I have unexplained fears. I wake up at night afraid and I don't know why. I'm trying to limp through my life like someone who's been in a terrible accident that leaves them crippled." Now, despite the terrible effects many of his patients experienced, associates of Cameron say that he actually cared about them. One of his staff psychologists wrote, "He abhorred the waste of human potential, seen most dramatically in the young people whose minds were distorted by what was then considered to be schizophrenia. He felt equally strongly about the loss of wisdom in the aged through memory malfunction. For him, the end justified the means, and when one is dealing with the waste of human potential, it's easy to adopt his stance." While he was conducting these brutal experiments, Cameron was appointed president of both the American and Canadian Psychiatric Associations. Joseph Raw Jr., an attorney representing a group of Cameron's victims who were attempting to sue the US government, said, "We hanged Nazis for doing the sort of things Cameron did." A study team member at the Institute said that Cameron was, quote, "the godfather of Canadian psychiatry. I probably shouldn't talk about this, but Cameron, for him to do what he did, he was a very schizophrenic guy who totally detached himself from the human implications of his work. God, we talk about concentration camps. I don't want to make this comparison, but God, you talk about we didn't know it was happening and it was right in our backyard." End quote. Cameron retired in 1964 for unexplained reasons. He was never punished for the crimes he committed against his patients, and after his death in 1967, the American Journal of Psychiatry published a long and glowing obituary. The verified stories we know about MKUltra are already unbelievable, but some sources claim that the CIA's experiments delved into even crazier realms. In 2007, investigative journalist Gordon Thomas released a book that claimed that the CIA used occult research during MKUltra. There aren't many sources to support this theory, but Thomas says the CIA used MKUltra to explore the world of black magic and harness the forces of darkness and challenge the concept that the inner reaches of the mind are beyond reach. Journalist Alex Constantine also wrote about the CIA's involvement with the occult. According to him, the CIA wanted to start their own cults in order to study the effects of mind control. Additionally, Constantine believes the CIA created a course in black magic and demonology at the University of South Carolina. Once again, the evidence to support his theories are flimsy at best, but it is an interesting idea nonetheless, and after what we've seen here today, would it really be all that surprising? Now, MKUltra isn't the only project that involved strange experiments. In 1952, Project MK Naomi was created to develop chemical and biological weapons for the CIA. Using deadly shellfish toxin, the CIA created a gun that fired deadly poisonous darts up to 250 feet. Committee Chairman Frank Church called the gun a murder instrument that's about as efficient as you can get. Besides the dart-launching pistol, the CIA also created a fountain pen that could shoot darts as well. So, if the CIA wanted all of these dirty deeds kept hidden, how do we know about all of them today? First of all, let's talk about why so much of this operation still remains a secret. According to Stephen Kinzer, Helms was really the only person at the CIA who had an idea of what Gottlieb had been doing. So, as they were both on their way out of the CIA, they agreed that they should destroy all records of MKUltra. Gottlieb actually drove out to the CIA Record Center and ordered the archives to destroy boxes full of MKUltra records. However, it turns out that there were some records found in other places. There was a depot for expense account reports that had not been destroyed, and various other pieces of paper remain. So there is enough out there to reconstruct some of what he did, but his effort to wipe away his traces by destroying all those documents in the early 70s was quite successful. Journalist Seymour Hersh was the first person to report on the CIA's illegal activities. In a New York Times article he wrote in 1974, Hersh reported, "Central Intelligence Agency, directly violating its charter, conducting a massive illegal domestic intelligence operation during the Nixon administration against the anti-war movement and other dissident groups in the United States, according to well-placed government sources. 1 year after Hersh broke the story, Idaho Senator Frank Church created the Church Committee to investigate abuses of power carried out by the U.S. intelligence agencies. During the investigation, it was revealed that 80 institutions were involved in the program, including universities, hospitals, prisons, and pharmaceutical companies. By 1977, Admiral Stansfield Turner had been appointed as the director of the CIA. He testified during a Senate hearing that the CIA had funded over 149 separate research projects during MKUltra. During the hearing, Turner told the Senate committee, "It is totally abhorrent to me to think of humans being used as guinea pigs. I assure you that the CIA is in no way engaged in either witting or unwitting testing of drugs today." Now, thanks to the revelations made by the Church Committee, President Gerald Ford signed an executive order prohibiting experimentation with drugs on human subjects except with the informed consent in writing and witnessed by a disinterested party of each human subject. Now that spells it out pretty damn clearly for them, doesn't it? Thanks to the mass destruction of MKUltra documents, we're never really going to know the full scope of the operation. What we do know is that for 20 years, the CIA used innocent people as guinea pigs in their cruel experiments, and none of the project's leaders were ever prosecuted for their crimes. That's right, crimes. After 2 decades of torture and experimentation, Sidney Gottlieb ultimately decided that the work he did for the CIA was useless. After retiring, this marauding torturer and his wife moved to a farm in rural Virginia, where they spent the rest of their days in peace. Meanwhile, Gottlieb's victims and their families are still struggling with the disastrous and long-lasting effects of MKUltra. Whew, alright guys, well, that wraps up our video on MKUltra. I'd like to thank you for watching, and if you want to see more content like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. And hey, I'm gonna see you next time.